The first thing Fleet Commander Ethan noticed was the smell. Not a broadcast, not a weapon signature, not a distress beacon or a declaration of terms. A smell, organic, faintly metallic, warm in a way that ship recycled air had no business being warm, drifting from the sealed cargo inspection bay of the Undying Calculation Asterisk, his personal flagship, the most fortified vessel in the Convergence Armada. The bay had been vacuum-locked for 11 days. Nothing lived in vacuum for 11 days. Ethan stood in the corridor outside the bay's pressure door, his secondary respiratory membrane sealed, his command staff frozen behind him in the kind of silence that happens when experienced soldiers encounter something their training never anticipated. The environmental sensor in his left hand read positive for carbon dioxide. Exhaled carbon dioxide. Continuous, rhythmic, unmistakably biological. Something inside the sealed bay was breathing. He had surrounded an entire planet 48 hours ago. He had 312 warships arranged in a mathematically perfect orbital siege formation, enough firepower to reduce Earth's crust to glass in under 6 hours, and the species on that planet had not launched a single defensive weapon, had not raised a shield, had not broadcast so much as a word of protest. And now something was breathing inside his vacuum-locked flagship. "Get me a life sign analysis," he said quietly, "and somebody tell me how it got in." Nobody answered the second question. The Convergence had been watching humanity for 19 months before the fleet arrived, and in those 19 months, the Strategic Assessment Division had compiled a document so thoroughly researched, so painstakingly cross-referenced across 47 independent intelligence streams, that Fleet Commander Ethan had read it 3 times and felt something he rarely permitted himself: confidence. The document was called Asterisk Species Classification, Homo sapiens, Threat Index Rating 2.1, Negligible. 19 months of observation, 19 months of intercepted communications, atmospheric sampling, electromagnetic pattern analysis, orbital traffic monitoring. 19 months of watching humanity's space program, fragmented, underfunded, politically bickering, operating vessels so slow that Convergence courier drones could lap them 17 times before they reached their own moon. 19 months of cataloging humanity's weapons, which were short-ranged, chemically propelled, laughably imprecise by galactic standards, designed almost entirely to kill other humans rather than anything beyond their atmosphere. The Assessment Division's lead analyst, a researcher named Voss Oren, had summarized her conclusions in the document's final paragraph with characteristic precision. This species presents zero credible threat to Convergence military operations. They are pre-transition, internally fractured, emotionally volatile, and technologically centuries behind minimum resistance threshold. Recommend Standard Protocol 7 acquisition. No specialized countermeasures required. Ethan had agreed. He still agreed technically. The math hadn't changed. But the smell from the vacuum-locked bay was getting stronger. "Commander," his second-in-command, Prex Duel, stepped close enough to lower his voice. The life sign analysis came back. "How many?" A pause that lasted slightly too long. "One." "One what?" "One human." Prex Duel's voice had a quality in it that Ethan had not heard from the man in 14 years of service together, something that might in a lesser officer be called unsteady. "Alive, resting pulse, no suit signature, no oxygen supply we can detect. Commander, there is no equipment in that bay capable of sustaining biological life. The human appears to be." He stopped. "Finish." "Comfortable." Ethan stared at the pressure door. "Open it." The human was sitting on a crate. Not strapped to it, not collapsed against it, not curled into a survival position conserving warmth. Sitting on it, cross-legged, eating something from a sealed foil packet with the focused, distracted attention of someone who had simply gotten hungry and done something about it. The bay's emergency lighting painted everything in low amber. The temperature was 4 degrees above freezing. The oxygen content, their sensors confirmed the moment the door opened and equalized, was barely 40% of standard human breathable minimum. The human looked up. He was young. The assessment division's biological cataloging let Ethan read that much, perhaps 25 years by Earth's calendar. Brown skin, dark eyes, close-cropped hair, and an expression on his face that Ethan's translation matrix processed as mildly inconvenienced by the interruption. "You speak English?" the human asked. The translation matrix processed the sound, matched it to the linguistic profile from 19 months of intercepts. Ethan heard the rendered version in his own language. "Do you use the same words I use?" "We have translation capability," Ethan said. "Good." The human took another bite. "You've got about 40 minutes before the others finish their checks and report back. I'd recommend we start talking now." The 3 words that followed the translation processed themselves in Ethan's mind in sequence, each one landing harder than the last. "The others." Let that sit for a moment, because it needs to. Not the fact that one human had somehow penetrated the most secure vessel in the Convergence fleet. Not the fact that he had survived 11 days in conditions that should have been lethal. The word that mattered, the word that Ethan turned over and examined from every angle in the 14 seconds of silence that followed the human statement, was others. Plural, ongoing, present tense, finish their checks. Ethan had 312 flagships in orbital formation around Earth. "How many?" he said. The human folded the foil packet, tucked it into a pocket, and looked at him with the expression Ethan would later describe in his report as *patient. Not smug, not triumphant, patient, as though the answer was obvious and he was giving Ethan the time to arrive at it himself. "1 per ship," the human said. "That was the minimum we could manage in the time frame. Some ships got 2. Prextool made a sound behind Ethan that was not a word. "That's not possible," Ethan said, and even as the words left him, he recognized them as the most useless thing he'd ever said in 40 years of military command, because the smell of exhaled breath was still in the air, and the human was still sitting there eating, and possible was no longer a category that applied to this conversation. "Commander," one of his bridge officers appeared at the corridor junction behind the staff, her face displaying the particular stillness that Ethan had learned to recognize as the expression his crew used when they had information they did not want to deliver. "We're receiving requests from other ships in the formation. Several of them report." She stopped, consulted her display, started again. "Unauthorized biological presences in secure sections. 11 ships so far." The number is still updating. Ethan did not look away from the human. "What's your name?" "Sergeant Marcus Webb," the human said. "Volunteer." "Volunteer for what?" "To be the one who talked." Webb paused. "The others weren't sure anyone would bother talking. I thought it was worth trying." "Trying to do what?" And here, for the first time, Marcus Webb's expression changed. The patience remained. It never quite left his face. Ethan would note later. It was almost architectural, built into his features rather than performed, but something shifted underneath it. Something that the translation matrix flagged and then failed to classify. Something the assessment division's 19 months of observation had recorded dozens of times in human communications, and had categorized as *emotional volatility and logged as a liability. Ethan, standing in the amber light with the smell of a human's breath in his vacuum-locked bay, was suddenly not sure it was a liability. "To stop you from making a mistake," Webb said, "a permanent one." The fleet's security forces found 41 humans in the first 2 hours. Each one was in a sealed or restricted section of a Convergence warship. Each one was alive with no apparent survival equipment. Each one, when discovered and engaged, did not resist, did not panic, did not do anything that the Convergence's extensive behavioral modeling for hostile biological contacts had predicted. They sat. They waited. Several of them asked, in various languages which the fleet's translation matrices scrambled to process, whether there was anything to eat. The 42nd human they found was dead. Not killed, not executed. The medical analysis that Prexduel relayed to Ethan's command station with trembling hands described it simply. The human had been in a section of the Triarch Ascending where the oxygen equalization had failed during the ship's standard rotation cycle. The section had gone to near vacuum for approximately 6 hours. The other 11 ship's humans had survived similar conditions. This one had not. The dead human was found sitting upright, back against the bulkhead, with a small notebook in her lap. Written inside, in dense, small handwriting that the translation matrix took 4 minutes to process fully, were 47 pages of observations about the Triarch Ascending's asterisk internal layout, crew schedules, weapon system access points, and the part that made Ethan set down his datapad and press both hands flat against his command console. 17 separate methods by which a single person, already inside, could disable the ship's primary drives without triggering the automated defense response. She had died writing number 18. She knew the section was losing atmosphere, Prexduel said quietly. The environmental logs show the warning indicators activated. She would have felt it. And she kept writing, Ethan said. Yes. The command center was very quiet. Get me Webb, Ethan said. Bring him here. They walked Marcus Webb through the Undying Calculations asterisk central command corridor under guard, and Ethan watched the human's eyes move continuously, not the darting, frightened surveillance of a prisoner cataloging escape routes, but the slower, systematic, almost architectural attention of someone building something in his head. Every junction, every pressure door, every guard placement. Webb wasn't looking for a way out. He was learning the ship. Ethan let him do it. He was curious now, in a way that 19 months of intelligence reports had not prepared him for. They brought Webb to the command center, and Ethan pulled up the medical file for the dead human on the Triarch Ascending and turned the display so Webb could see it. Webb looked at it for a long time. Her name was Yara Osai, he said. She was 31. She had 2 daughters. He was quiet for a moment. She knew the risks better than anyone. She's the one who designed the insertion methodology. She designed the method that killed her, Ethan said. She designed the method that got 41 people inside your fleet. Webb looked up from the display. She knew 1 or 2 of us might not make it. She accounted for it. His voice was flat and even. She accounted for it and she volunteered anyway. Why? Ethan said, not strategically. He genuinely wanted to know. Webb's eyes moved to him. Because the alternative was 312 warships turning Earth into glass, and Yara had 2 daughters. The command center was quiet again, differently quiet than before. You have to understand something, Ethan said carefully. I have reviewed your species capability assessment. I have seen your weapons, your ships, your defensive infrastructure. You cannot stop this fleet. Even with 41 people inside our ships, you cannot stop this fleet. What you have done is tactically meaningless. We know, Webb said. That was not the answer Ethan had expected. You know. We know we can't stop you. We've known that since you showed up. Webb sat down in the chair across from Ethan without being invited to, which somehow didn't seem like disrespect but like practicality. That's not why we're here. Then why? To make sure you know it too. Webb leaned forward slightly. To make sure you understand exactly what stopping us is going to cost you. Because there's a difference between winning and winning easily, and we needed you to understand that difference before you made a decision you can't take back. The number of humans found aboard convergence vessels reached 63 by hour 4. 63 people on 312 ships. Some ships still hadn't found theirs. That was the part that kept pulling at Ethan's attention, the ships that hadn't found theirs. Because either those ships didn't have a human aboard, or the humans aboard those ships were very good at not being found. And given the evidence so far, asterisk not being found seemed like the more likely explanation, which meant the number 63 was not a total. It was a minimum. How did they get aboard? Prextool asked Ethan privately, in the brief interval when Webb had been given food and water and left under guard in the command center while Ethan stepped out. We were in high orbit. The ships were sealed. The boarding protocols were designed for species that breathe standard atmosphere and require pressurized suits beyond it, Ethan said, and for species that will not fit through spaces smaller than their own body's primary measurement. He thought about the dead woman's notebook, the 18 methods for disabling a ship from inside. Pull the environmental maintenance logs for the week before we arrived. Check the access conduit records. Prextool went pale, or the equivalent, his secondary pigment cells contracting. The maintenance shafts. They spent 19 months watching us watch them, Ethan said. They know our ship's layouts. They know which access points are unmanned. And he stopped. Something from the assessment file, something logged and discarded. He pulled it up on his personal display. An intercepted communication from 9 months ago, low priority, flagged by an analyst as asterisk recreational athletic event, no tactical relevance. A recorded human competition in which individuals pressed their bodies through the smallest possible openings, ranking themselves by how narrow a passage they could navigate. Not a competition. Training. 9 months ago. They had started training 9 months ago. They were preparing for this, Ethan said, before we even announced the fleet was coming. Prextool stared at him. How did they know? They didn't, Ethan said slowly. They didn't know we were coming. They knew something was coming eventually, and they prepared anyway. He stood with that for a moment. They have been preparing for us or something like us for years, perhaps decades, not because they knew when, because they decided not to wait until they did. He went back inside to talk to Webb. Here is what the Strategic Assessment Division's report had gotten wrong, and it was not a small error. It was not a miscalculation at the margins. It was a fundamental categorical mistake that Ethan could now see running through every single observation, every conclusion, every recommendation like a crack through load-bearing stone. The report had measured human asterisk capability. It had not measured human asterisk decision-making under the assumption that capability was irrelevant. These were not the same thing. They were not even close to the same thing. And the distance between them, the vast, strange, disorienting gulf between what humans could do and what humans would decide to do regardless of what they could do, was the thing that Ethan now sat across from, wearing the face of a 25-year-old sergeant who had volunteered to be the person who talked. "Tell me about the people on my ships," Ethan said. "Who are they?" "Volunteers," Webb said again. "All of them." "You mentioned that. Volunteer from what? A military unit." "Some of them." Webb was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that felt like it was organizing something. Yara was a systems engineer. She'd never served in any military. "The man on your ship 3 positions starboard, his name is Daniel Cho. He's a high school physics teacher. The woman on the asterisk eternal premise, I don't actually know her name. She signed up 2 weeks ago. I know she's a nurse because she made sure everyone had their medical supplies checked before insertion." Ethan processed this. "They are civilians." "Most of them." "Why civilians?" "We had more volunteers than we had trained people to send." Webb said it simply, without drama. "When we put out the call, we were expecting maybe 30 responses. We needed to turn away over 400. He met Ethan's eyes. People with children, people with medical conditions that made survival statistically less likely, people who'd never been in a dangerous situation in their lives. We turned them away. They argued with the selection committee." A pause. "Some of them argued for weeks." The command center's environmental systems hummed. Outside the viewports, Earth turned slowly, blue-green and impossible, lit by its single yellow star. "I need you to understand something," Ethan said, and he was aware that he had said this before, and that the last time he said it, he had been trying to convey a military reality, and that this time he was trying to do something he hadn't done with an alien species in his entire career: convey genuine uncertainty. The Convergence has fought 37 acquisition campaigns. We have encountered species with more advanced weaponry than yours. We have encountered species with more sophisticated defensive infrastructure. We have encountered species that fought longer and harder than the projections suggested they would. He looked at Webb. We have never encountered a species that sent civilians through maintenance shafts into vacuum-locked cargo bays before the fighting even started. No, Webb said, I don't imagine you have. It doesn't change the outcome. Not of this engagement, Webb agreed. Then what is the point? And there it was. Webb's expression changed again, not to something Ethan could easily name, something the translation matrix flagged as asterisk complex emotional composite and then gave up trying to break down. The point, Webb said quietly, is that you now have to decide whether it's worth it, not whether you can win. You can win. The point is whether you want to spend the next 100 years fighting a species that does this on the first day, before a single shot has been fired, with volunteers who argue with the selection committee for the right to go first into the dark. He leaned forward. You have 31 ships that still haven't found their humans. Commander, those people have been in your ships for 11 days. 11 days of learning, 11 days of mapping, and the ones who haven't been found yet are, by definition, the best ones. Ethan said nothing. We can't stop you today, Webb said. We know that, but we can make sure that every commander in the Convergence knows what stopping us costs, and then we can go home and train more people, and when you send another fleet, we can put 200 people in your ships instead of 60, and they will be better prepared than this group was, because this group will have taught them, and the group after that will be better than those. And we will do this. Webb's voice was entirely calm, entirely level, entirely without the emotional volatility the assessment division had flagged as a liability, until you stop coming, or until there are no humans left to send. The silence lasted a long time. You would lose, Ethan said. Eventually, maybe, Webb sat back, but you would never stop paying for it. And we've done the math on how long we can make you pay, and it's long enough that the Convergence's strategic analysts are going to have a very uncomfortable meeting when this report lands. Ethan stared at him. The human stared back. And you, Ethan stopped, restarted. You personally, you came here to talk instead of staying hidden like the others, which means you are the one asset you burned. Something moved through Webb's face. Not regret exactly. The translation matrix circled it and settled on asterisk acceptance. Yeah, Webb said, that's right. You sacrificed your usefulness to have this conversation. Someone had to, Webb said. I volunteered. It was Prexduel who found the file. It came in during the third hour of Ethan's conversation with Webb, flagged by the intelligence processing team with a priority code that made Prexduel go very still at his station, and then walk directly to Ethan and say quietly, You need to see this now. The file was a recording, not intercepted from human communications, extracted from the personal storage device of the dead woman on the asterisk Triarch Ascending. The device had survived in her pocket when she hadn't, and the Triarch Ascending's asterisk security team had cracked it and transmitted the contents to the fleet intelligence pool without knowing what they had. The recording was made 18 months ago. 18 months ago. 1 month after the Convergence's long-range reconnaissance drones had first entered the outer edge of humanity's solar system. 1 month after the first, faintest electromagnetic traces of the fleet's preparatory positioning had been detectable, theoretically, by sufficiently sensitive instruments pointed in exactly the right direction. The woman, Yara Osai, 31 years old, engineer, mother of 2, was sitting in a small office in front of a camera. She was presenting a proposal to a room full of people the recording's angle couldn't show. And what she was proposing, with engineering diagrams and oxygen consumption calculations, and hand-drawn maps of ship layout templates sourced from asterisk decades of humanity's careful, obsessive study of every piece of alien technology and contact data humanity had ever encountered. Was this exactly this? She built the plan when they first detected us, Prexduel said, before we had made any declaration of intent, before we had done anything but appear at the edge of their system. She assumed hostile intent, Ethan said. She didn't assume anything. Read the transcript. Prexduel handed him the process translation. She says, and I am rendering this as literally as I can, she says, I don't know what they want. I don't know if they're hostile. I hope they're not. But I've been given a chance to prepare a response that doesn't require us to wait and find out, and I am constitutionally incapable of not doing that. Ethan read it twice. Constitutionally incapable of not preparing. Not brave, not aggressive, not even strategically rational by any model the Convergence had ever built. Something that didn't have a military classification because it wasn't military behavior. It was something older than military behavior, something that operated underneath strategy and training and doctrine, some reflex so deep in the human architecture that a systems engineer with 2 daughters could sit down 18 months before a crisis and begin designing a plan for people to volunteer to die in vacuum just in case it came to that. The assessment division rated them at 2.1, Ethan said. Yes. What is the threat rating for a species that does this? Prexduel was quiet for a moment. There isn't one, he said. The scale goes to 9. I don't think the scale was designed with this in mind. The reports from the fleet kept coming. 71 humans found. 83. Then, for 3 hours, the number stopped climbing, and the security teams on the remaining ships swept their vessels with increasing urgency and found nothing. And the nothing was somehow worse than the finding. Hour 7. The relentless Calculus, a destroyer in the fleet's outer ring, reported that one of its primary maneuvering thrusters had been manually decoupled from the fire control network. Not damaged, decoupled, by someone who knew exactly where the coupling relay was and had the dexterity to reach it and had chosen, deliberately, to disable rather than destroy, to leave the ship functional but to demonstrate capability. A message, not an attack. Hour 8. The ascending principal found a human who had been aboard for the full 11 days, surviving on condensation from cooling lines, and what the medical team later identified as a specialized compressed ration block the size of a human fist. This particular human, a woman, mid-40s, physically unremarkable in every way the Convergence's biological assessment cataloged, had been living, undetected, in the gap between the secondary hull plating and the internal pressure structure. A space 30 centimeters wide and 9 meters long, she had been in it for 11 days. She was calm when they found her. She asked if they had her colleague's notebook, referring to Yara Osei. She wanted to make sure someone had picked it up. They told her Yara hadn't survived. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, did she finish it? She was on method 18. The woman closed her eyes. She said she wanted to get to 25. Then, after a pause, the last 7 aren't in the notebook. She talked me through them before we split up. You should know that. The ascending principal's asterisk security chief relayed this to Ethan personally, and Ethan relayed it to Webb, and Webb received it the way someone receives news they were prepared for but had hoped not to need to receive. That would be Tomoko, Webb said. She was always the backup. The backup for what? For if the talking didn't work, Webb said. You're talking to me, so it's working. He paused. The information in Yara's notebook and the 7 methods Tomoko knows that aren't in the notebook, none of that gets used unless this conversation ends badly. Ethan looked at him steadily. You're telling me you have leverage. I'm telling you that the people on your ships are not here to destroy them, Webb said. They never were. They're here because we needed you to understand that we could. That's different. His voice was even. We don't want to destroy your ships. We want you to go home. Those are completely different outcomes, and only one of them requires any more people to die. And if I choose to proceed with the acquisition, Webb didn't look away. Then the people on your ships will do what they came here to do. Not all of them will succeed. Not all of them will survive. But enough will, and you will lose ships, and the people on the ships you lose will die, and you will still win eventually, and Earth will be gone, and you will go home knowing that a pre-transition species with chemical propellant weapons and ships that your courier drones can lap 17 times made you bleed for it. He let that sit. And then you will write a report explaining to the Strategic Expansion Committee exactly how that happened. And that report is going to live in Convergence archives forever. And every species the Convergence encounters after us is going to read it. Ethan felt something move in him that his own translation matrix would have struggled to classify. "You're not trying to win," he said. "It was not an accusation. It was recognition. You came here to make losing cost enough that winning becomes irrational." "We came here," Webb said, "to introduce ourselves properly." The fleet held position for 6 more hours. In that time, Ethan did 4 things. He had Webb brought food, actual food, not ship rations, from the Undying Calculations * senior staff provisions, which the human accepted without comment and ate entirely. He transmitted the complete record of the day's events to the Strategic Expansion Committee with a priority flag he had used exactly once in his career. He reviewed the Assessment Division's report a 4th time, and this time he read it with the specific experience of a man who had smelled breathing in a vacuum-locked room, and almost every sentence revealed a new dimension of its own inadequacy. And he stood at the main viewport for 40 minutes and looked at Earth without speaking to anyone. The planet did not look like a threat. It looked like what it was, blue and fragile and lit from one side and slowly spinning, entirely indifferent to its own precariousness. He thought about the woman in the 30-centimeter gap for 11 days. He thought about a systems engineer designing this plan 1 month after detecting a faint electromagnetic trace at the edge of a solar system, not knowing what it meant, not waiting to find out. He thought about 400 volunteers arguing with a selection committee for the right to go first. "Commander," Prexduel appeared at his shoulder, "the committee has responded." Ethan took the transmission. He read it again. "They want to know," Prexduel said carefully, "if the threat assessment was in error." "Yes," Ethan said. "What should I tell them?" Ethan was quiet for a long time. Outside, Earth turned. Somewhere inside this ship, Marcus Webb was sitting under guard, patient as architecture, waiting. "Tell them the threat assessment was not in error," Ethan said. "Tell them the Assessment Division correctly identified that this species cannot currently defeat a Convergence fleet. Tell them that is true." He set down the transmission. "And then tell them that we may be the first fleet in 37 campaigns to encounter a species that already knows it cannot win and has specifically decided that winning is not the point." Prexduel said nothing. "Tell them I am recommending suspension of the acquisition," Ethan said, "pending full reassessment of the species classification framework, not because they can stop us, because the cost projection models don't have a variable for what they're willing to absorb, and we need one before we proceed with anything." "The committee will push back," Prexduel said. "They'll say one engagement isn't a sample size." "I know." Ethan turned from the viewport. "Tell them I have 63 witnesses aboard fleet vessels who can speak to sample size, and a notebook from a dead engineer that describes 17 ways to cripple a warship from inside, and a woman who survived 11 days in a 30-centimeter gap who wants us to know she has 7 more. Tell the committee I will brief them fully when we return." He paused. "And tell them." He stopped, looked at the viewport again, at the blue planet. "Tell them the species on that planet has a word," he said slowly. A very old word, older than their writing systems. The assessment division logged it dozens of times across intercepted communications and classified it as a cultural artifact with no tactical relevance. He shook his head. 19 months. The word is *stubborn. Tell the committee I have reconsidered its relevance. He went back to Webb. Webb looked up when he entered, that same continuous architectural attention, filing the change in Ethan's posture before a word was spoken. Well, Webb said. The fleet will hold, Ethan said. I am recommending suspension pending reassessment. Something moved through Webb's face. Not relief, not triumph. The translation matrix went for *relief and then corrected itself to something that didn't have a clean translation. Something in the vicinity of *exhausted gratitude, which was different, which was the expression of someone for whom a good outcome had never felt guaranteed. And the people on your ships, Webb said. They'll be treated well and return to Earth when the fleet withdraws. Tomoko's information, Webb said. The 7 methods, she'll keep that to herself if the fleet withdraws. I know, Ethan said. That was the point. Webb nodded slowly. Sergeant, Ethan said, and he said the word with the weight he would give a military rank, because he had decided it had earned that. In 37 campaigns, I have never ended a conversation believing the being across from me had introduced themselves properly. He looked at Webb. I may have been wrong about that too. Webb's mouth shifted into something that the translation matrix identified as a smile, and then flagged with a secondary notation. Complex, possibly irreducible to single emotional state. We're better in person, Webb said. I noticed, Ethan said. The fleet left Earth orbit 11 days later. It was, by any military metric, a non-event. No shots fired, no ships destroyed, no territory taken. The Strategic Expansion Committee registered it as operational suspension pending reassessment, a classification that had existed exactly once in Convergence history prior to this, used to describe an engagement with a civilization whose star had gone nova during initial positioning and made the planet moot. The analysts who reviewed Ethan's report in the weeks that followed agreed on almost nothing except this. The threat rating of 2.1 was not defensible. There was considerable debate about what number replaced it. The scale had never been designed for this category of input, but nobody suggested 2.1 anymore. The notebook was kept, copied, analyzed, distributed to 12 separate research divisions. Yara Osai's 17 methods were studied with the attention usually reserved for weapons systems from civilizations a century more advanced than your own, because that, the research team slowly concluded, was what they were. Not weapons, something harder to classify. A mind that saw the geometry of a ship it had never been inside. In a crisis it couldn't be certain would happen, and mapped 17 different ways to be useful anyway. The 31st ship that found its human found her in an access conduit 2 decks below the bridge, unharmed, with a sketchbook full of structural diagrams and a calm expression, 17 days after insertion. She had been so quiet, so patient, so completely calibrated to stillness, that 3 separate sweeps had passed 2 meters from her hiding position and registered nothing. When they brought her out, she asked one question before anything else. The fleet turned around. They told her yes. She sat down on the deck and pressed her hands flat against the floor and closed her eyes, and she stayed that way for a long time, breathing, while the Convergence soldiers stood around her and did not speak, because there was something in her that none of their training had prepared them for, something that made the air feel different, something that the translation matrix processed as *relief and immediately recognized was not large enough a word. The Convergence did not return to Earth in force for 40 years. By then, humanity had ships of their own, slow by galactic standards, short-ranged, underpowered, but ships. crude by people who had grown up hearing about Yara Osai's notebook and the 30-centimeter gap and the sergeant who volunteered to be the one who talked. When Ethan's full report was finally declassified and entered the Convergence's permanent strategic archive, it was 47 pages long. The final paragraph, written by Ethan himself, in language that broke from his characteristically formal style in ways that his staff had never seen before and would never see again, read as follows. The species does not appear to calculate acceptable loss in the way that our models predict. They appear instead to make a prior decision, one that precedes any specific threat assessment, that loss of a certain magnitude is already acceptable, and then they proceed from that decision as a premise rather than arriving at it as a conclusion. The implications of this for any sustained engagement are significant and have not, to my knowledge, been previously documented in 37 campaigns. I do not know what it costs them internally to live this way. I suspect it costs a great deal. I suspect they pay it anyway. The archive classified it under * species assessment, Homo sapiens. Subcategory, threat index unclassifiable. Notes field, added by an unknown analyst sometime in the 30 years after filing, in handwriting that did not match any registered Convergence personnel. They are not the strongest, they are not the fastest, they are not the most advanced. They have, however, demonstrated a consistent and reproducible willingness to climb into the dark alone with no certainty of return, on the chance that someone on the other side might be willing to talk. The Convergence has no strategic framework for this. We have been trying to build one. We have not yet succeeded. We may not.